Okay, so it's just gone past, so we will get started now. We are recording this session just to make you aware of that, and hopefully by looking at the slide, which hopefully you can see, you should know that you're in the right place. So this is our second webinar now in consecutive days to support the ReOpen campaign that CIMSPA is currently running with a number of different partners. As I said, this is the second webinar and we're very much focusing on the reopening of pools and knowing how to make them COVID secure. So we've got a number of different experts which we'll introduce you to and come on to shortly. A little bit of housekeeping to begin with. As I said, we are recording this session and we're going to make it available for those perhaps weren't able to join in this afternoon. Apart from myself and the expert panelists and Tara, everyone else will be muted. However, you do have the chat box, so please use that as your opportunity to ask questions, and we will try to respond to those and keep it as interactive as possible throughout the 90 minutes or so. We've got a couple of rules just to make sure that the session itself runs as smoothly as possible. We do ask that within the chat box, there's no swearing or rude language and you're respectful with any of the comments that you make. Microphones, as we've already mentioned, will be muted unless we've got perhaps a reason to unmute people, and we'll let you know if that does take place at any point in the session. Any questions or comments from yourself should be directed to the experts or Tara. So please make sure that with your questions you direct them to us just to make sure that you're able to get a response. Any participant breaking any of these rules, unfortunately, we will have to remove you from the session just to make sure that we can maintain and get through all of the content that we want to. I said this for the first time yesterday, just to repeat at the bottom, I'd never even heard of a Zoom bomb, but apparently it is a thing. So you can just see the bottom statement there that lets you know what would happen in the event of a Zoom bomb if that were to go off at all. On to the important stuff. So as I said, this session is very much around the reopening of pools and making sure that they are COVID secure once we are in a position to reopen. We've got some brilliant experts with us this afternoon to answer the really important questions. So we've got Joe Talbot from the Royal Lifesaving Society UK, and Joe is the commercial director. We've also got three expert panelists from Swim England. We've got Katie Towner, Head of Learn to Swim, Alex Haines, Strategic Partnership Manager, and Richard Lamburn, Head of Facilities. I'm going to, in a moment, hand over to Tara, who's very much going to lead through this webinar and be asking the key questions. Just to give you an outline of the format, we've already collated a number of different most commonly asked questions from a number of facilities and our experts as well, with those being the people that are very frequently being asked these questions. We will keep the session interactive throughout, but there'll also be a little bit of time towards the end once we've gone through the questions we have collated to answer your questions as well. As I said, we roughly expect the session to last around 90 minutes, which will take us up to about 4 o'clock. And then we'll be wrapping up. After the session, so tomorrow, as you're in attendance, you'll receive an email and that will have a handout with all of the recorded questions and responses so that you've got them for reference. And we'll also be asking for a little bit of feedback as well, just so that we can help continue to improve the webinars and everything that we're trying to do. So without further ado, I'm going to now hand over to Tara. And she'll be leading throughout the session.
Thanks, Phil, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this webinar. Just to give you a bit of context why we're running these webinars. I've been sat on hundreds of these webinars over the last few months, and it's become obvious to me over the last few weeks in particular that people on these webinars aren't interested in listening to the likes of me talking about what the government may or may not do. They are actually more interested now, you guys, on getting some very concise, pragmatic answers to a number of very specific questions you've got. So that was patently obvious to me over the last 3 weeks. So that's why we're running these webinars over the next couple of weeks. First of all, thank you all to our guest panelists. We took the time over the last couple of weeks to go out to all of our employer partners and ask what are the most common questions that you need answering in relation to opening pools. So thank you to those who are on the call now who've contributed to that. The way this works is I'm just going to ask a load of those questions. I'll keep an eye on the chat box. So if you're asking something there that I think will already be covered later in the webinar, bear with me. But if not, I'll jump in and introduce some of those questions as we go, so we keep it as interactive as possible. Most webinars last an hour. We decided to do an hour and a half because that's the other thing I found with webinars is we run out of time to ask burning questions, and the panel gets all the limelight and the audience doesn't get to get their questions answered. So I'll try and share that as deftly as I possibly can. So without further ado, I think I'm going to start with the guys from Swim England, if that's okay with you. Here's a question I keep being asked over and over and over again. Don't know who wants this one, but how effective is chlorine when cleaning equipment? And how long does it last?
I think I'll take this one. Thank you, Tara. Yeah, so I'm sure that many of you that are on the call have already heard me going on and on and on about chlorine disinfection and the way in which that we have, the theory that we have used to draw up the parameters to operate your pools at when you get the green light to open. And that is formed off a basis of evidence taken from research undertaken by the WHO, by the CDC, by multiple other papers that evidence the CT time, the contact time at which the virus survives within water. And should I say the virus or surrogate virus is very similar to COVID-19 within swimming pool water conditions. And that has drawn up our basis for our chemical parameters within our water. Now, it's also important to add on top of that the note that there is no evidence that the virus can be transmitted through water anyway. That doesn't mean it can't be, but there is no evidence to say that it can. It hasn't been proven that it can't, but to this date, there has been no cases of transmission through water anyway. Added to that, we want to provide a double layer of security by evidencing that the virus is actually killed within the water as well. So transmission and its survival are two things that play within our favour when we're talking about swimming pools and swimming in water. What we are doing is we are in the process, and I know that Alex is on this call because they're also partnering with us on undertaking the research into COVID itself within swimming pool water conditions. So because it's a very new virus, all of the research is formed off very, very similar enveloped and non-enveloped viruses and their time at which they can sustain the level of chlorination within our pools. So that's pool water. But then when we talk about equipment, then we're adding in another consideration. So what we have recommended within our guidance is about reducing the level of risk. We use the term sanitization. That's not disinfection. Disinfection is 100% elimination of the virus. And the only way in which you can prove that is in order to undertake the test itself of a piece of equipment submerged in a liquid, in this instance pool water, with the parameters at which we have. Now, we are, like I say, starting that process. So that is being undertaken, but our guidance is all about providing a safe level of risk. And if we have equipment that is continually in disinfected water that we know has a positive effect, that we know that the water itself hasn't been evidenced as a vector for transmission, then we're suggesting a level of safety. Now, there is, and Joe brought it up just before the call, there is PUTAG guidance out there that talks about submersion of equipment into a higher concentration of disinfection. Now, we're not necessarily disagreeing with that point of view, but we're also not promoting that, because the fact that the parameters at which the disinfection levels there are advised are about using evidence of surface contamination, and there's a difference between contamination on a surface and then removal of the virus, and the virus being submerged into water. So they're completely different tests that you undertake within a laboratory. One is a surface test, where you would swab the surface to see if there is evidence of the virus still there after you add the disinfectant, and the other is submerged within a solution. So it is a submersion test. None of those tests have been done, and as I said, we are the first to undertake that process. So we feel that yes, that it is definitely highly likely that you submerge the equipment in such a high concentration of chemical that you will inevitably kill the virus. But we feel that using the floats and the equipment in chlorinated water, that we've got plenty of evidence that suggests that the virus will not survive within that environment, that the individual that is touching any equipment is again continually putting their hands into a sanitized environment. Yes, you want to limit the use of equipment and sharing of equipment, and I think it's important to note, the government's advice on outdoor facilities and also the utilization of equipment in outdoor facilities, that it is not necessarily always sanitized, that if you do share balls in an outdoor environment, that you just are washing your hands more frequently. It is not that tennis ball or that item of equipment is evidently disinfected between every single use. It is about reducing the risk of transmission. And we feel that until we've got these tests completed and we have 100% evidence that we have provided a clear basis and a clear level of de-risking the spread and the transmission of COVID. So hopefully that answers that question to that point. I don't know if Alex or Kate, you want to add anything in from that?
No, I think we'll come to teaching equipment in my bit shortly.
Okay.
Rich, that's great. What a comprehensive answer. So in summary, it's safe to use chlorinated water to clean your kit. We had a session yesterday, it was all about cleaning and risk assessments, and we focus really on good hygiene practice of our users more than anything else. And you can sit and trawl over Public Health England's website, Public Health Scotland's website. That same message repeated over and over again. Appropriate social distancing and good hygiene, washing of hands. So thank you for that. I mean, I certainly, I've looked into it, and I've had a couple of chats with some brainy people like you, Rich, and I'm pretty confident that the safest part of a site at the moment is a swimming pool. So good to hear. Okay, slightly different subject, and I'm just keeping an eye on the chat box here. For those, there's a couple of questions that I think we're going to cover, so just bear with. So back to lessons then. I think this is probably you, Katie. Another one I get all the time is why can't I teach from the water now? What's the rationale?
Yeah, it's a really popular question. Now, we suggest that teaching from the poolside obviously gives you the best overview, and it's the easiest way to maintain social distancing. But if you want to have your teachers in the water, that's not a problem. You just need to do a risk assessment to say why they're in there, but they still won't be able to manually handle or support any of the participants. So we've created 3 separate webinars, one on teaching from poolside, one on effective communication, and one on deep water teach. And when we talk about deep water, we're saying any of those participants that might be slightly out of their depth. And this is to give teachers the confidence to be able to deliver that safe and secure lesson from the poolside if they're used to getting into the water. We know that if they're on the poolside, they can give a better overview, they can give better demonstrations, clearer communication, and conduct a safer lesson at that point, whilst maintaining the social distancing as well. I hope that answers some of the questions.
Yeah, okay. Can I just add to that, Katie, which I get asked this, so how do I maintain the 2 meter thing? What guidance can you give me? How do I, is it guaranteed? So again, we talked about this yesterday. Now that 2 meters has gone to 1 meter, does that mean I need to change my rules and my signage? And the answer was very, very clear. That hasn't changed. The guidance is you must maintain 2 meters unless it's not financially viable to do so. And if it's not, you must be able to demonstrate mitigating circumstances to lower that distance. So we're sticking to the 2 meters. Is there anything you can help us on that, about how we arrange our lessons and whether or not there's some learning available, support for teachers in managing the 2 meters distancing?
Yeah, exactly that. So with the 3 webinar opportunities we've got, we talk about the different types of activities and organisational methods, as well as teaching methods that you can use to help, again, mitigate that risk of transmission. So when the children are static, obviously we recommend that they've got 6 metres squared worth of space, 2 metre distance between them where possible. When they're in transition and they're actually swimming past one another, because they're moving, obviously the risk of transmission is reduced then because the time that they are next to each other is reduced. So you could have your classes set up, for example, you may have 6 to 8 in a class, you could split the class into 2 and they could swim across the pool and transition past one another to get to the other side. So using that kind of cannons and waves and organisational methods are really great ways to conduct a safe lesson. Also using limited amounts of equipment as well, and making sure that those children only use that set of equipment that you're giving them. So they may have a float and a noodle or some arm discs, and that's their station. So you can set up the pool to have maybe signage either side, or maybe just a coloured float either side, and they know that that's their area to swim in at that point. We know when children are swimming on their back and when they get excited about being in the pool that they don't always swim in a straight line. But if you can demonstrate the activities that you're doing and the equipment that you're using and the teaching methods that you're using, do everything in their power to limit that risk of transmission, then you will be absolutely fine. We've got in our supporting documents, so if any of you have read the guidance, if you go a little bit further into that guidance, the Learn to Swim team have put together a number of supporting resources which include different pool layouts, which doesn't just include what happens in the water, but your teaching station, as well as where the children would come onto poolside and maybe they all walk around the pool anti-clockwise or clockwise, whichever direction you choose to do so, and entry and exit points as well. So actually starting to teach them around how to get in and out over the side of the pool rather than having to keep using the steps to try and mitigate, again, that risk of transmission with the less touch points is what we're trying to create. You've also got things in there like emoji cards. When we talk about being on the pool side, we talk about clear demonstrations and communication. Now that doesn't always have to be your voice. You can use obviously hand signals. We've got flashcards. We work with swim pics as well that depict all of our activities that you can use to back up your verbal communication with some real visual aids as well to help support and again maintain that social distance between yourself and the children and between the children within that class as well. So there's plenty of things and video footage and some support and advice to both teachers as well as parents. We've identified through doing all of our kind of webinars and talking to the industry, actually the more information that you can give your parents to prepare their children for the environment they're coming back into in advance, the easier it's going to be for you to maintain and manage that lesson, because the children are going to be fully aware of where they come into the pool. So maybe do a little video walk rounds of how they're going to get into the pool, where they'll meet and greet their teacher, and the area of the pool that they're now going to be swimming in if that's changed. And again, giving the parents the confidence if their children are moving into slightly deeper water or maybe a different section of the pool. So the more information that you can give to your customers in advance, I think the better.
Great. Katie, where can I get hold of that advice and guidance? Is there something you can whack over to Phil now and we can get it in the chat box? Or
yeah, I'll put both of the links in the chat box. I'll put the link through to our library and the link through to the Institute of Swimming Training. So we had 9 training opportunities. They were fully booked within 48 hours, which was great, but we filmed them all and recorded them very similar to this, and they're going to be made available hopefully at the beginning of next week, if not tomorrow, if we get them done. So I'll pop that in.
That's great. Thanks, Katie. Just a couple of questions come along the chat box. I'm going to ask a different question now about showers. Katie, can you just have a look at the question raised by Joanne Brown? Because I still think we need some clarity about in or out of water teaching just there.
Just about to press send on my answer to that Joanne's question. I know Jo, I think if it's the same Jo, I know her. Yeah. I'll just press send now and you can add Katie.
Yeah. Andy Wildsmith's asked a good question. You know, we're talking about proximity and time passing swimmers. Does that count as mitigation for the 2 metre to 1 metre rule? As far as I'm concerned, yes, it does, unless somebody on the panel says to the contrary. That's how the guidance was devised, really, Andy. You know, this was before the 2 metre equals 1 metre plus and all the rest of it. There were always going to be considerations needed in opening swimming lessons again, and that's why there's so much science behind this around, you know, what's the likelihood of you contracting when you're passing somebody within a certain proximity for X number of seconds. You know, it's an impressive bit of guidance that Swim England have come up with, and it's scientifically corroborated. So I hope that's answered your questions, but it hasn't. Ask me again. Now, somebody's mentioned this in the chat box, and here's another one that I keep getting asked about showers. Some people have opted to close their showers. This was raised on our cleaning webinar yesterday and our risk assessment webinar. However, so I'd love somebody to answer what's your advice on the use of showers. I think there's one of the myths that might need busting here, Rich, is the spray from a shower could be considered, a contaminant. Is that true? And therefore, should I close my showers? The other bit we were asked yesterday is where people have opted to close their changing rooms. Of course, they still need toilets. So we got a concise answer from Right Direction around managing toilets yesterday. So if anybody's on the chat box would like to see that, we can send yesterday's webinar out to you. And the question around whether or not this is being recorded and can you share it with your staff? Absolutely, this will be available to you after the webinar is closed. And for those who missed the cleaning one yesterday, we'll send that to you too, which will answer some of your questions. So talk to us about showers. Let's see whether there's a real problem there.
So I suppose really, I'm going to just sort of, so we've obviously talked about pool water, and I'm sure we'll talk about pool air at some point, but I would say that they're probably one of the best controlled environments that we have, and clearly the highest level of risk here is the changing room environment because they're smaller in area. You're going to have more congregated space, you've got doorways, you've got entry points. So that is clearly a risk area that's higher with regards to transmission. So the whole purpose of the guidance was looking about how you transit people through that area quicker. So the whole theoretical argument of beach ready is that you spend less time within the changing rooms. It's never been developed in order to restrict the opening of changing rooms and not have that available, because there'll be some individuals that will need to be able to use a changing room. Some will not be able to come ready. Some will need that space. They'll need that privacy. So we still need to have them available, we believe, in a certain capacity. So the beach ready idea is turn up with your costume, underneath your clothing, you're quickly off. Then we use the terminology of, ideally, if you could shower at home, that would help, because then that might mean that you can then spend less time in the shower before you go into the pool, or more so, spend less time in the shower post your swim. So it's not about, we want to ensure, as we talked about before, that we've got effective chlorination within the pool water in order to adequately disinfect and break down not just COVID, but plenty of other virus and bacteria that can survive in pool water that people can bring in. So we can't detract away from that point that if we don't shower, the human body brings in to the pool contaminants that use up disinfection and then render us without a sufficient disinfection to kill harmful organisms. So we still have to have an element of showering available. That is still a paramount part of the swimming experience, that we shower before we use the pool. Now, if that is done more at home and then a quicker rinse before you go into the water, yeah, okay, maybe you can mitigate that way. But more so, the saving time is in the post shower. So after you've swum, we don't want people to be spending, Alex spends, half an hour washing his hair after he swim. Before you can go and do that at home. So it's almost about just mitigating the time in which you spend within the shower environment. Now, we talked about potentially having to isolate showers if to maintain social distancing within those areas. The consideration of transmission of showers, we're not talking about Legionella, we're not talking about the inhalation of fine water droplets and mist from showers. As I said, there is no evidence that it is transmissible through water. So yes, airborne transmission is still a potential, and we've got to do all we can to reduce that. But the shower, we haven't seen any evidence that would indicate that is a higher risk area. If anything, it's a safer area because you're continually washing. And as we know, you wash with soap and water, and that then creates an environment where the virus then leaves the body or leaves the hands. It's important to have evidence that it doesn't disinfect. So they're not creating any higher risk. They're actually controlling a risk and controlling other risks as well. By closing them or limiting, as the same with toilets, we're potentially creating more health risks elsewhere. So hopefully that answers the question. Our guidance is all about limiting the time spent in those confined spaces. Again, would a shower area have the 1 metre rule in place because it isn't seen? Where you can make, it's important to understand that 1 metre, 2 metres, 3 metres, we've got varying different degrees of social distancing recommended across the world. It's important to understand the risk factor. The increasing risk of transmitting COVID is the closer at which you are to someone and the longer at which that time is spent when you're within close proximity. So the risk controls are all about increasing the distance where possible and reducing the time. So if you can maintain 2 metres in every part of your building and in every environment, you're creating a lower risk of transmission. It's not about trying to go to the smallest possible distance. It's about creating the safest possible environment, but balancing that against the aspect of running a business. And of course, like you do with any other health and safety question, you balance risk against cost, time, and inconvenience, and you come up with a risk, a risk assessment that balances those and provides a safe level of risk. So we have tried to evidence that is 2 metres as much as possible. And as Katie mentions, in some cases where you're passing in a shower area at quick time, that there may mean that you might encroach on the 2 metres. But when you're standing still in a shower and the time might be for a number of minutes, you would probably want that environment to be at least 2 metres apart. Hopefully that answers it. Anyone else got anything else? Yeah.
Comprehensive again, Rich, thank you. So and I think that probably answers some of the questions coming through on the chat box. So I've got another one for you that I keep being asked, which is about this, beach style, beach ready. So people are saying to me, what are we doing, Tara? Are we expecting people to sort of turn up and then go home soaking wet? Is that what you're saying?
I'll jump in there, Tara, if that's all right. Yeah, we obviously, once we released the guidance, we had quite a few people ask us about that. And I think because we're in a unprecedented novel time, it's understandable some people want really clear distinctions on everything that we put out. The idea obviously of beach ready is really arrive ready to swim, and it allows for a minimal use of change rooms, which is as Rich has been talking about with showers, and we know that the government is currently reviewing change rooms are a pinch point and an issue. So we want to promote a minimal use of changing rooms. So it doesn't mean you have to do this, and it certainly doesn't mean that you're going home wet necessarily. We know clubs might be happy to do that, and we know our elite swimmers choose to do that. But the idea is that you come beach ready, which means ready to swim, and potentially you do your activity, and then the changing rooms are for your exit, for example, or you provide people an area to dry and change somewhere else. The likelihood is, we think obviously change rooms will be used, but the potential, I'll give you a good example, maybe an operator that told me yesterday that they're going to have people arrive ready to arrive via a different entrance to get onto poolside. The lifeguard will meet them there. They will then bring them to a seating area where there will be marked out areas and boxes. You can take your clothes off, change, and then you as a group have the lane swimming as your activity, and the lifeguard manages that. At the end of that 45-minute session, the lifeguard will blow the whistle, ask everyone to get out, and then shepherd them into the changing room, where that group will then get to use the changing room in a social distance environment and the showers if they need to, and then leave via the changing room. While that's going on, the second lifeguard on rotation would meet the group at the entrance that they come into, and they can start that swim. So it reduces the time for cleaning and changing rooms, because you can get one group in as the others in the changing room. So that's just an example. So yeah, we didn't expect people to literally show up, swim, jump out, go home, little children soaking wet, and by the time they got home, they've soaked their car. But it's all about that kind of minimizing the use and trying to avoid those pinch points.
Brilliant, thanks Alex. And presumably that operator would have worked out, I'm just thinking about some of the sites I've managed over the years, where I didn't have village change, I had group change, and it was, you know, I think of one of my first pools, you know, the change room was about the size of my downstairs toilet. So you could probably only get about 4 or 5 people in there at a time. So that operator would have considered in 4 or 5 people from that lane in a staggered approach.
Yeah.
So,
capacity is an issue for a lot of the partners that we're talking to, because if it's not so much what activity can happen in the pool, because actually our guidance and recommendations allow for quite a lot of activity to happen in the pool with decent capacity. The issue we're finding is people getting through the changing rooms, and the capacity within the changing rooms and the corridors and the access points that are the mitigating or the issues in terms of increasing capacities. So once they get to the pool side, you can have, you know, using Rich's bather load, which is in our guidance, you could have, you know, 30 plus swimmers potentially swimming in a 25 by 12.5, but getting that group through different styles of changing rooms is a difficult thing when we're taking into account, you know, government guidance on social distance. So we've tried to allow for some flexibility depending on that. One of the big issues we had when we were writing the guidance was the numerous scales and sizes and different versions of changing rooms we were trying to work with. So again, it's guidance, it's theory, and we couldn't go as far as to dictating change rooms because of that. Like, as you mentioned there, just thinking about 2 village and you know, single sex changing rooms, all these different parameters.
Thanks, Alex. Interestingly, I mean, every site's different, right? So you're going to have to make a call about your own facility. Again, as we alluded to earlier, it's probably worth you having a look at the webinar that we ran yesterday, because Right Directions were on there, and they were talking about how to risk assess, and they've got some templates and some guidance that's available to everybody on this call. If you go to on the CIMSPA website, Phil will drop it into the chat box now. On our website, you have the reopening page. And on there is oodles of information that you can just tap into and download. For example, there's some cleaning training, there's a cleaning rota, there's a sample risk assessment document, there's a sample document of how to calculate building capacity in changing rooms, sports halls, the whole lot. So there's lots and lots of resource there that might help shape your thinking. And also this week, to accompany all of that, we've launched, or we're launching this week finishes tomorrow, but it will be tomorrow, a free training package to everybody in the sector called Reactivate. It's an online platform. So the way the hierarchy of this works for us as a sector is UK Active have created a framework. It's a high-level framework. It's a 2-pager that says, dear government, this is how we mean to manage our facilities in a COVID secure way. And then underneath that, CIMSPA then has provided masses of information that tell you how to achieve that framework. And then underneath that, working with our partners such as the RLSS, SGA, Right Directions, Alliance Leisure, Les Mills, I mean, there's masses of it. All of that information then goes on an online platform. So if you've got staff in furlough, for example, and you're thinking about, okay, I need to be open ready, you can send all of those learning pieces out to your staff. That's legal to do so through furlough. And you can record who's undertaken the training. They can receive certificates, you know, so you'll be able to monitor who's read and understood some of your practices. I mean, you know, you can go a lot further with Reactivate and white label it with your own logos on, etc. Just conscious of time, I think we've managed to answer quite a few. I'm just looking at some of the other ones that I had written down. Yeah, here's another one. How do we apply this guidance to a free-form pool, a leisure pool? do I have to change my thinking? How do I measure that? And, you know, I think I said 6 square meters yesterday instead of 6 meters squared. That would significantly reduce the number of people getting in pool. How do we do that?
I'm happy to take this one. So obviously, as I mentioned earlier, what increases the risk of transmission? Distance and time. So you'll have to look at the individual activity. We've set a minimum of 6 meters squared, and in some cases that might need to be increased where you've got an activity where you have people from different households that may come, you know, that require a larger area because it's free form and they're moving in different directions. When we're, you know, the easiest control measure is lane swimming, is a swimming lesson where you have an instructor or you have a set of signs that are directing people to swim in a set way, because we can control the direction at which they're swimming, in some instances the speed as well when we talk about slow, medium, fast lanes, and better control the distance. But when we talk about free form pools and open pools, it's still the same principles. You apply the same principles to the setting. I mean, what you have in the benefit is when you have a leisure pool that might be open to a family session, is that you've got people from the same household there. So they, of course, don't need to socially distance, but we need to ensure that they are socially distancing from people outside of their own household. So we set the 6 meters squared as a minimum, because we couldn't see in any circumstance where you could actually operate going under that and allowing for some flexibility. So theoretically, you could have one bather per 3.14 meters squared, a meter radius around them all. They're all 2 meters apart, but none of them could move. So, you know that, you know, the whole idea of going swimming is to be active. So, you know, we can't rely on people not moving in the water, and we definitely can't rely on people all moving at exactly the same speed in exactly the same motion. So we have to have some flexibility. So we felt that at 6, that was sort of, you know, we had to give it a minimum requirement. That gives you sort of, you know, easy to work out half of your existing bather load on a facility. You know, there was times where you may want to increase that, like I say, in free form pools in an open public session. But we feel that that's sort of the minimum parameter, and the guidance is there to be taken and applied to any pool. We just use the most common pool within our examples, which is a 25 meter 6-lane pool. We have more of them than any other swimming facility in the country. So predominantly that forms the focus of most of our examples and most of our drawings and layouts that we provide.
Okay, thanks, Rich. I mean, I think with all of these things, this is as much to do with how you communicate to your users as anything else in managing expectations. You know, you are going to be expected to observe social distance as far as you possibly can in a swimming pool. Otherwise, lifeguards are in for a bit of a tough gig, and we'll come on to that in a second with Joe. So it's just moving on from free form pools, Rich. I'm just thinking about some of my sites again that I used to manage. What about flumes and inflatables and diving boards and all the other sort of additional tricky bits? You're on mute, mate.
Sorry, there's me trying to make sure I mute myself in between rabbiting on. What we've tried to indicate with those sort of settings is that they're individually risk assessed, that you look at the touch points. So if it is a flume, that you know that you can adequately distance people queuing up to the flume, that you can do it at the bottom of the flume, that you can ensure that touch points are clean, so it might be handrails, etc. So you've got to control the individual aspect of it. We haven't in any way outruled or said that they shouldn't be used, because I don't think that's our place to do that. There may be increased risk on some facility, on some aspects of, you know, inflatables, where, you know, you've got to consider the fact of how many people you can allow on them in order to ensure that they are not only distanced, but also to consider contamination, how you clean them down as well, which is a challenge pre-COVID, let alone now. So I don't, you know, what we've done is just tried to look at each one as an individual and in its own entirety. Can you control that risk? You know, we know now well enough what the risks are. We know it's about surface contamination, more so, and proximity of people for airborne transmission. So as long as you can control those two elements, then we don't see why they shouldn't be able to be operated. But it's impossible to go into specifics because we have so many variations. So we just try to give some clear headline principles, which I know is almost what, you know, not what people necessarily want to hear, but just consider the risks of transmission. How do you control them on each of those activities?
Yeah. Okay. So just, you know, just to summarize that, if I'm given what you said earlier about chlorinated water and contamination of surfaces, if I were running a pool now and I had my flumes open, I think what am I looking at, Rich? The cues, I would make sure that there are, markings to say, keep yourself socially distanced. The handrails are okay because you've got chlorinated hands essentially, but we don't need a lifeguard every 10 minutes cleaning all the handrails and the tops of the flumes. That's completely over the top, is what you're saying, is it?
Yeah, I'd say your advice more so is to people, where they put their hands, if they're going to touch handrails, not to put hands to mouth, to nose, that, they get back into the water and it's chlorinated. So it's almost like we've got to think of where the transmission happens. It doesn't happen that you touch it and it gets into your body that way. It's about the hands touching the face, and then that's the way in which you potentially can contract. So it's just about educating users as well a little bit. And again, we can put clean sanitizer, hand sanitizing points at the bottom, at the tops, just to try and increase those, so to speak.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Joe. I think we're going to jump into lifeguards here quickly. So, I might have a little bit of knowledge in this area from a previous life. So, is it the lifeguard's job now to police social distancing, do you think, in a swimming pool?
Can I go one step back? I will answer that question. I just want to go back to flumes and inflatables that Rich mentioned. I think one thing to consider is please have a look at your accident stats, because if you've got a flume or a wave chamber or something that causes a lot of lifeguard rescues, then you should really consider whether it's right for that activity to be put on in this environment, and actually would it be better to not run that activity during this time, because what we don't want to do is have lifeguards doing rescues repeatedly because we're going to be putting them at risk. So that's just, aside from everything Rich has said, just another consideration. So in terms of lifeguards policing distancing guidelines, the lifeguards have a job to supervise the users of the pool and educate them. And especially during this period, they've got extra responsibility to try and prevent the need for them to do a rescue. So it wouldn't be right for them to be given additional responsibilities to police social distancing. And RLSS wouldn't suggest that lifeguards are given extra responsibility over and above their normal responsibilities.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Here's one I get asked all the time, weirdly. Do lifeguards need to wear face masks all the time? I keep getting this one.
Yeah, well, we get it quite a lot as well. It's really interesting because the HSE put some information out about face masks and talked about if you don't normally wear them for your job, you shouldn't just revert to suddenly wearing them. And for us with lifeguards, it's not intended that lifeguards wear them all the time. But if a lifeguard is going to get within the social distancing guidelines, so close to someone, for instance, they might be giving first aid, they might be helping someone use the pool hoist, then at those times they should wear a face mask, but certainly not at all times.
Okay, so we got asked about face masks yesterday, and because the guidance from government is that we don't have to wear them, then we won't be wearing them in leisure centres. If the government then suddenly decide that they should be worn by everybody, they changed their mind on retail, didn't they? Started with public transport and then they applied it to retail. If that guidance changes, then we'll make sure that every operator in the country knows about it. But today, not the world, there's no provision for that. So here's one I got yesterday. How does a lifeguard perform a rescue, Joe? And also, I got asked a very specific question about rescue breaths and compressions yesterday. So I gave the answer that you don't have to apply rescue breaths unless you've got a pocket mask. But I've got a very specific one about paediatric resuscitation.
Okay.
Can you handle those two for me?
So let me start with the rescues. There is nothing we can do that will protect lifeguards 100%. There's no PPE in the world that provides 100% protection. We are going into opening swimming pools, hopefully soon, with an element of risk. And there will be, for everything we do in life, there is going to be an element of risk. What we've put across in all our guidance, and we've just released posters to put up in staff rooms for lifeguards, is that lifeguards, firstly, do everything they can to prevent accidents happening. Because if the accident doesn't happen, somebody doesn't need rescuing. But let's say somebody does need rescuing. Step one for the lifeguard is to remain on the side and use rescue equipment. If that doesn't work, or the person isn't able to take the rescue equipment, then they get in the pool with the rescue equipment. And last resort, essentially, is get to the casualty, perform the rescue, and get the casualty to the side as quick as you can, where your teammates will be there with PPE on and will be able to extract the casualty and treat them. So yes, there is an element of risk, but if we don't get on with our life, we'll all be sat at home for the next 3 years because we're not willing to take a tiny element of risk. And we know through our data that lifeguard rescues are few and far between, because lifeguards do a great job at preventing accidents and they educate the swimmers really well. So we know there's going to be less swimmers, so accident rates should be lower. So the chance of a lifeguard needing to perform a rescue being in that final step should be relatively low.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
I do the CPR bit.
Yeah.
So this has caused quite a lot of discussions in the industry. There is very, very clear guidance from the Resuscitation Council UK about CPR. And for general CPR, if somebody needs CPR, you give CPR. You do not open the airway and put your head next to their head to check for breathing. You just look and check for breathing. And if they're not breathing, you do compression only CPR. You don't do rescue breaths. But what Resuscitation Council UK do say is that rescue breaths for a paediatric, which is either a child or a baby, is crucial to their chance of survival. And they actually say that, and it's in our guidance and it's on their website. So knowing that, and we've got advice from legal and medical experts, we have left it down to the operators to decide whether they want their lifeguards to do rescue breaths or not. And we've said if operators want lifeguards to do rescue breaths because they know that they're crucial for the paediatrics chance of survival, then they are only to do it with a Lairdale pocket mask. And that's because the filter in that pocket mask gives up to a 99% protection against viruses.
Okay.
Unfortunately, it isn't you're going to do this or you're going to do that. It is the operators need to risk assess and decide what they want their lifeguards to do.
Okay. I might come back to you on that one in a sec. All right, thank you. Let's talk about training quickly. That's another one. So it's sort of, again, 2 questions in one, Joe. You know, my pool's been closed for 3 months. My lifeguards haven't done any training. They've lost their fitness. Some of them have expired during that time. What do we do about that?
Okay, I'm going to take this in 3 parts. Let's look at the qual and let's look at the 2 different types of training. So in terms of the qual, any RLSS UK and IQL UK qualification that expires between the 16th of March and the end of September, they've all been extended until the end of September. So we shouldn't have any lifeguards in the next few weeks that will be expiring. They're not going to expire till the end of September. I'm pretty sure STA have done the same with their lifeguard qual as well. But if you work with STA, just worth double checking with them. But I'm pretty sure they're doing exactly the same. So in terms of quals, that's not an issue. We've got until the end of September to sort out anyone that is going to be expiring. In terms of training, lifeguards tend to train quite regularly. Some train weekly, some train monthly, some train quarterly. We released free online learning for ongoing training at the very beginning of this, and there's 10 free sessions available, and they're available to everyone, regardless of whether you qualify with Highfield, STA or RLSS. Any lifeguard can do that free training, and there's 10 sessions. So no, it's not going to test their swim ability, but it is going to test their knowledge and understanding, which is well worth doing. In terms of their fitness and in particular their swim fitness, I've got no doubt that there are some lifeguards out there who have spent the last 16 weeks because of furlough, sat playing computer games and doing not very much. So we may have lifeguards that are really fit, 'cause they've been out swimming in open water, or they've been cycling or running, but we may have lifeguards that have lost 4 months worth of fitness. My suggestion to operators is that don't throw them straight into a comp test. Try and you're putting lots of procedures in place for your pool, so why not test those procedures on your lifeguards? Invite your lifeguards in for a fitness session. Try the way that swimmers will come in, the way they'll get changed, the way they'll go around the pool. Use your lifeguards as guinea pigs, and that will also allow you to check on their fitness. Any lifeguard that you feel their fitness has dramatically dropped and they're not going to pass a comp test, you can then put some extra training in place with them, or fitness training in place, so that you can get them to the required standard.
Okay, and did you cover expired? So I was looking at the chat box. My
Yes.
You did, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So there's a couple of questions coming in that we perhaps haven't covered yet. So the face mask versus face coverings question is all of the above. The government tells us we've got to wear face coverings in a leisure centre. We won't be. Of course, if the public come in and they choose to wear a face mask, that's absolutely fine. I've experimented with one of these, disposable ones. Exercising with one of these on isn't fun. Don't know if anybody else has had a go at that, but that's entirely up to customers. There's a question about two bits. I know that we've been answered them, but just for my clarity, actually, where does the liability sit, Alex, with clubs? I get asked all the time. So should clubs have their own COVID risk assessments? I know we're going back to occupiers liability and all the stuff that we always, challenges we do have with clubs. What's the score there?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert from the club side, and I can defer this back to them. But my understanding, obviously, when we wrote the guidance and from having sat on some of the discussions clubs have had with their clubs, the COVID officer's role, similar to when you set your committee up and have your safeguarding responsible officer in that capacity, is there to add to the risk assessment. We do recommend that clubs write their own risk assessments, but they align them with the operator, so that the operator has agreed how the club is going to return to the pool with their risk assessment in place, and meeting, again, the guidance the operators put out, but also the guidance we have put out and the recommendations we've put out. The COVID officer, in that respect, what we don't want to do is put this, weight on them that suddenly nobody's going to want to do that role for expectation and, for nerves of messing up. We want to offer and the club's team are doing so, is offering some training and guidance around what that role would entail. But really, it's understanding the operators' policies and procedures, understanding Swim England's guidance, understanding any updates from the government guidance that comes out. And then informing that into the risk assessment, which is then approved by the operator. So there's a kind of a three-layer approach to mitigating risk. They also have a responsibility to just communicate with the club members and the parents of the club members as well. So it's largely a liaison point. It's making sure operator and club are aligned, and it's making sure that the clubs feel comfortable and there's an expectation of how they should return and behave. It's not about taking all the responsibility and putting it on one person.
Okay, for those who don't know what a COVID officer is, Alex?
Well, again, we're talking about unprecedented and novel times. We have recommended in our guidance that clubs designate one person to act as that responsible officer, to understand, as I mentioned, the operator's policies and procedures and what the expectation is of the operator, the club's risk assessment, how they're going to run the session, and government guidance, and obviously our guidance as well, which should chime into that. So what we want is somebody to take ownership of understanding the new parameters with which club activity will take place. That's the COVID officer, and they should form part of a club committee. So as I mentioned at the start, there's welfare officers on a club committee, for example, that would take responsibility for understanding the law and the guidance that is in that area. We're just going to add on, and hopefully we don't have to do this for too long, and this phase passes us and we can get rid of the idea of a COVID officer. But for the immediate future, and until this is over, we want somebody to just act as that responsible person. It's not about taking liability, but just making sure everyone is informed and there's a bridge between operational procedures and club activity.
Okay, brilliant. So in essence, the same as before COVID, actually, your relationship with your club and your codependency on each other's understanding of risk assessments and evacuation and all sorts of things.
Absolutely.
Doesn't change, does it?
No, absolutely that.
Okay, excellent. Joe, there's two repeat questions, one for Katie, I think, and one for Joe. Katie, there's still some confusion about in water and out of water teaching that I think we need to just cover off before we close the webinar. Joe, when we're talking about masks, there is some guidance from RLSS, I think, in relation to first aid, is there, in the use of masks, and there seems to be a number of recommendations about which types of masks here. Can you clarify that for us? You're on mute, my love.
Sorry, I've answered one of the questions in the chat. It's hard to keep up. We recommend either the FFP2 mask or the surgical mask, which has a rating for resisting water splashes if they come towards the mask. So that's our recommendation. Clearly, it's down to operators to risk assess. Somebody's asked about whether the masks can be reused. We also, we've got a shop available with some of our products to support operators. There is a reusable mask which has a similar rating, so that might be an option for you to have a look at. But if you are purchasing masks, I would thoroughly recommend that you make sure you know what you're purchasing and you get the guidance from the manufacturer, because there has been a case of a few purchased and they didn't meet the correct specification that they stated.
Okay, thank you. And can we start lifeguard training again, Joe?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, at the moment, training can take place. The challenge is training within swimming pools. And we asked the HSE this question a couple of weeks ago. And the HSE put us on to Public Health England, who basically said, if the training is essential, so if you need it to take place in a swimming pool, then you need to get authorization from the operator of the swimming pool and the local authority. If both of those give you permission, then you absolutely can start training within a swimming pool, providing that training is essential.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And there's another question here. Is I was working towards my MPLQ. I was due to take my test, and then lockdown rocked up. What can I do? Do I need to maintain this online learning and then complete my test once the pools are reopened? Is that enough?
So I was just responding to this person. You don't have to be a lifeguard to do the training. So I'm going to put the link on the chat so anyone can register and do it. If someone was working towards their MPLQ, I would suggest they jump on and do the temporary sessions. If any training they've done before lockdown, that still applies and that still can count towards the total number of training hours, so that person can be assessed once the pool's open and they can get back into the pool.
Yeah, okay, so that should answer Nick's question. Quick question from Tony Clarkson about, can I still take 12 lifeguards training?
It's an interesting one. It very much depends on your pool space, your room, your equipment. If you've got a huge pool with nobody else in it and a massive training room and loads of mannequins, then you may be able to manage it. Our suggestion is you look at the environment, the equipment before you make a decision, and you may choose to start with lower numbers and make sure that you can manage it before you then build back up to the 12.
Okay, lovely. Are we going to need to increase lifeguard cover now, Joe, do you think, on the pool side?
There is no reason to need to increase lifeguard cover unless, of course, you are going to give them extra responsibilities. So if you are going to give them extra responsibilities, and Alex spoke about one operator he's dealing with where the lifeguard helps to direct swimmers from one area to another, then in those circumstances, of course, you're going to need to, because you still need the lifeguards that are providing supervision to be able to provide that supervision. The one thing that has come up is some lifeguard positions are sort of static standing positions around the pool, and they may well come within close proximity to a swimmer that's moving around. So these operators have said they may move those lifeguard positions. Now, if lifeguard positions are moved because of COVID, then you would need to do a visibility test to make sure the lifeguard can still see the area that they're responsible for. And if they can't, that might mean an additional lifeguard. But in theory, providing you're not giving them any extra responsibility and their position stays the same, there should be no need to increase your number of lifeguards.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. And then just another question about their responsibilities. Is it okay for them to set up and dismantle equipment still? No.
Yeah, absolutely. All we would say is we would advise operators to consider it, and I'm sure Swim England have got this in their guidance as well. Consider the programming. So whereas before you might have put a lane rope in and out every hour, we don't want lifeguards putting themselves at more risk. So it might be better to look at your pool program and actually have the lane ropes going in mid-morning and coming out last thing at night, rather than lots of changes of pool equipment.
Okay, lovely. Just looking, Andy, could you put the link about the lifeguard training sessions? Yes, Andy will do that. Another one from Andy. If we have pool space to ensure social distancing within the year, we've done that one. Okay.
Tara, can I pick up the one about bag valve mask?
Yes, please.
So this has been asked a lot, and we have actually we've clarified this in a newsletter that went to all our trainers yesterday. It's called a bag valve mask because essentially it's a mask that goes over the casualty's face, and it's got a big bag attached to it. Rather than breathing into the casualty, you pump the bag. They're used by paramedics, first responders, and they're used in hospitals. We got some medical advice on this, and our medical advisor recommended that this isn't something for lifeguards to use. It requires quite a lot of training, and it's quite a specialist skill that if you're using it a lot, you hone that skill and you can do it. But if you're only doing it once in a while, it's unlikely that you'd be able to do it effectively. So for the moment, RLSS UK don't recommend the use of a bag valve mask, and all of our guidance points towards a pocket mask if you want to give ventilations or breaths. So at the moment, no. If operators decide to go off and get some training on bag valve masks with medical professionals, then that's really up to you. But at the moment, RLSS UK wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, lovely. Thanks, Jo. I'm just in the Q&A box now. I've got chat box open, a Q&A box. Question from Kevin Lane. Hello, Kevin. How are you? The answer to your question about the survey results from LeisureNet, I will do better than that, Kevin. I will send you the full survey. So this was in relation yesterday to a comment about 87% of LeisureNet conducted a survey of around 47,000 consumers, and by far the highest, most important factor when making a decision to coming back to leisure centres was cleanliness. So Kevin, I will send you the results of that survey the minute this call finishes. This is one from Ian Gray. Would you advise that high chairs are removed so staff can maintain social distancing from customers who may approach them? Good question. Jo, fancy that one?
High chairs actually give you quite a good distance from a customer because you're up high and you're away from the swimmer that's coming to ask you a question. So I wouldn't straight away remove high chairs. I would consider it very carefully, because you might actually find that the high chair provides a barrier, because if they're out of the high chair and they're standing, then the swimmer could come right up to them and be very, very close. So don't make any rash decisions on that. Get into your pool, have a look at the high chair, get someone on the high chair, and but I would see that actually high chairs are probably a better option.
Excellent. Okay, Jo, I'm just going to go back to Swim England a second. There's a couple of questions I think you just need to clarify in the Q&A around the wearing of face masks, and also a couple around training. So Jo Brown's just said, when we return to deliver lifeguard training comp tests, when we train them all for the first time to get them competent to open the pool, how are we covered legally and safety-wise that no one is training is up to date when we get in the pool. Is this a case of the risk assessment? And also there's a question around insurance too, Joe. So if an operator has to make a decision about, if I were an operator now, still, what would my decision be about rescue breaths? Mine would be, please apply compressions only to adults and use a pocket mask for children and babies. That would be my decision. That's not me saying that's everybody's decision. I'm pretty certain I'd be happy to make that. So the question is my insurance compromised then? And I'm guessing the answer is because we've had ratification from the Resuscitation Council UK.
Yeah.
We're okay? Yeah.
It's printed up in RLSS UK's guidance. We've copied it into our guidance. Ultimately, you want to check with your insurers because insurers can make their own decisions. But I cannot see any reason why you would have a problem with your insurers where you're following governing body and experts' guidance.
Okay, so where can I find that, Joe? Because if I were contacting my insurer, I would be copying and pasting your guidance into my letter or to my email.
I'll put a link on the chat.
Okay. Excellent. Katie, can we come back to this in water, out water?
Yeah, of course.
Question.
Obviously, best practice and what we're suggesting is teaching from the pool side. So that's where we would like to see all of the teachers. It's the easiest way to maintain social distancing. It's the easiest way to maintain an overview of that session. However, in some circumstances, if a teacher does need to be in the water, a risk assessment needs to take place. Now, we had an example of this where somebody is teaching in a pool that is not deck level, so the pool's raised out of the ground. So if the teacher is on the pool side, actually they can't maintain a clear overview of that lesson taking place. So actually their risk assessment was better felt that they could be in the water. Now, if they're in the water, they still have to maintain social distancing. That risk assessment again still needs to take into consideration the number of pupils, the distance, the activities, the depth of water, and how you're conducting that lesson at that point. So where possible, teach from the pool side, but if you feel for safety reasons that it would be better for you to be in the water to maintain an overview, then you can do. Now, a lot of people are saying to us, well, safety reasons could be that the children could fall off of a noodle, or we might need to give some more manual support. If the children, if you do a risk assessment and think the children actually aren't safe with either fixed flotation equipment, so there's plenty of fixed flotation equipment out there you can use, arm discs, aquaplanes, shark fins, that are really great pieces of kit to use that should mean that you don't need to manually support. But if you do, then ask a parent or a carer to be that manual support. We had the question that if a parent got into the water in a class, would they require a DBS check? And no, they wouldn't, because actually they're only with their child at that point. So the parent and the child come together as a unit and have to then maintain social distance from the rest of the group. So you might have to adjust your ratios for space at that point. But if that's the only safe way that you can teach that child is by providing a parent or fixed flotation equipment, then that's the way that you can do so. Just because you need to get into the water still doesn't mean that you can manually support. So heavily recommend teaching from poolside, but in the event that you feel you cannot maintain a safe overview to conduct that lesson, do your risk assessment and you can get in.
Okay, that's new to me, that, Katie. So thanks for that. Is that in your guidance that I can ask a parent to get in?
Yeah.
That will change the ratios ever so slightly, will it? Or because the same household, not so much?
They will come together. So that unit, if they're together, only require that 6 meters squared worth of space because they've come together as a pair. But considering obviously the size of the adult and the space that you've got available, you might consider your ratios at that point, but most pool settings you wouldn't need to.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Katie. That gives it some clarity.
Sure. Tara, can I just add one more thing to that? If you are looking at putting parents or carers in to provide that extra support for those maybe with special educational needs or disabilities, and they are the only parent getting into that lesson and the other 6 children don't have a parent, again, be open, honest and transparent with the other parents of why they are in the water to avoid any confusion up front.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, Katie, that's really helpful. Just while I've got you all, for those of you who, we've got Swim England and RLSS here, but also many of you use STA pools. or have STA swim schools, we will post the STA guidance out following this webinar to everybody who's attended. So if you are an STA pool, we'll share that with you guys too. And also, if you use STA qualified lifeguards, they, like RLSS, they've worked together on this. They've also extended the expiry date to the 30th September, I believe. In fact, now that I've just said that out loud, I can see that Claire Brisbane has just said it. So thank you, Claire. So a couple of other quick questions. This is about private hire. I've got a question here from Zoe, who says that she hires a pool, which is a private pool. So will they have measures in place, or do I have to create those measures and do them all myself? I'm not sure who that is. It might be you, Alex.
I was going to answer, but I think Rich might be best placed. But from my understanding, the facility owner would need to take responsibility for the hirer. So they would need to, make preparations, risk assessments for anyone using their facility. So they may be offsetting the responsibility for the activity onto the person that's going to use the pool if they only plan to use that hirer and no one else. But in reality, I think that first starts with the facility to make preparations for anyone they're hiring out to. Is that right, Rich?
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Joe, we're just getting a few questions in here about spinal cord injury management and conducting a spinal rescue. Just thinking about proximity, etc. Pretty sure I know the answer to this one. You're not going to leave a casualty face down with a suspected broken neck and walk away, are you? But what's the answer to that? It's get in and conduct the rescue, as you've been.
Yeah. Again, we know that it's very rare. It's not something that comes up every day. It's very rare that a lifeguard has to deal with a suspected spinal injury. And given that, again, we've got limited numbers in the pool and the lifeguards are really focused on accident prevention, there's a very slim chance that a lifeguard would need to perform a rescue for someone with a suspected spinal cord injury. But if they do, then they're going to have to. They're going to have to take action, follow exactly what we've said, get in, do the rescue swiftly, get the casualty towards the side of the pool where the lifeguards can help and get the casualty out on the side of the pool.
Okay, nice and concise, thank you. There was another question earlier, which I'd just like to pick up about the Reactivate training. Is it available in the home nations? The answer today is no. It's a bit awkward, actually. This was funded by Sport England. And therefore it's available to all of our employer partners in England. That said, we are in discussions with the Welsh Sports Association and Sport Scotland. So as far as I'm concerned, I would like to get it out UK wide. So leave that one with me. I think it should be UK wide personally. So leave it with me. Dean just asked a question for clarification. Dean, so hello, Dean. God, I'm starting to sound like a radio DJ. Hello, Dean. I'll stop that immediately. This is about training. So what we've got here, Joe, do swim fitness and test procedures following the date we can reopen. So can we do them before or after? Just for clarity.
And that was the question we asked the HSE and Public Health England, because we appreciate that you need to get into your pools to do training to be ready to open the doors to general public, which could be from the date that the government allows. So, and that's how we posed the question to Public Health England, the Health and Safety Executive, is can people, staff, go into swimming pools prior to government's date that they're allowing pools to open to do training? And that was the response we had. Yes, as providing it's for essential training and providing there's authorization from the operator and the local authority. And I think I know of about 7 or 8 trusts and a few operators that have actually delivered training already for lifeguards, done fitness training and comp test training in the last few weeks. So it's already taken place where they've had authorization from local authority.
Lovely, thanks. Katie, just to tee you up, there's a question here about how masters swimming sessions will operate. There's another question quickly for you, Joe. Are we encouraging assisting lifeguards to put on PPE on arrival onto poolside before assisting the first rescuer? And would this be an apron, mask and gloves?
Yeah, so we are, we're saying that the team that extract the casualties should have PPE on. So as well as the comp test you're going to do when your lifeguards come back, you're also going to need to take them through any changes to your procedures so that they are fully aware of how things change. Now, we've done free posters that are available to download on our website that you can put up in staff areas to help remind lifeguards of the changes. But we do recommend that you do some kind of training session to outline all the changes. So yes, lifeguards reacting and going to support to get a casualty out of the water would definitely wear masks. What we did do some tests with this, and you can't lift a casualty out of the water wearing gloves because the casualty will slip and you're going to cause injury. So we are saying you lift the casualty out with just mask and apron on because of the risk of injury.
Okay, and the masks are the masks that we mentioned earlier, the I can't remember, the FFP2s and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, okay.
FFP2 or surgical.
Excellent, thank you. Katie, what about masters?
Master sessions are going to look very similar to the normal club sessions anyway, so it's going to be dependent on the pool out, 50 metre pool, 25 metre pool. What I would suggest is your numbers in the lanes might be slightly lower, depending on how fast those swimmers are swimming. We've got 10 per lane at the moment in some of our diagrams, but we know obviously the faster the swimmers, the less you're going to be able to have in the lane, because by the time the first one's gone, the last one won't have left the wall by the time they get back. So no real difference, but speak to your club, and you can look at our club guidance on our website as well. So I'll pop the link into there so you can see some of those pool layouts and diagrams that you might come to when you go to your master's session.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Nick Whitmore, is that agreement written anywhere? Sorry, which agreement? Just add into the Q&A box for me and I'll get it answered for you. There is a question which is a tough one, really. You know, who is managing social distancing in the pool? If it's not the lifeguard, who is it? It's quite tricky, that.
I've just answered that one in the Q&A, or given my kind of opinion. As you say, Tara, it is tricky, and it's an individual operator decision, I think. And, you know, considerations would be that additional staff or lifeguards that aren't on duty as a lifeguard, for example, can be given other roles and responsibilities if they accept that, and other members of staff could be given that. But realistic, you know, but the other opportunity would be to use signage and pool guidance and pool rules, operator-led guidance to inform the users on their behaviour, their expectations. Again, we've given parameters where social distancing can exist, that swimming can happen. And we really need to enforce those pool rules. And I think some of the positive conversations I've had is that people almost see this as an opportunity to reinforce some of those old good behaviours and get rid of lane rage and unnecessary overtaking and, you know, those sorts of behaviours anyway. So it really is a case now of beefing up signage, making sure everyone's aware of what's expected of them and that personal responsibility. And then if operators want to consider how they can, you know, police that, there's probably a better phrase than policing, then, you know, that's a consideration. We're just asking that anyone who's responsible for drowning prevention as their primary function is not given additional things to worry about.
Tara, can I just add, when you go to the supermarket, there is nobody policing social distancing. We're all aware of COVID and we're going about our daily life taking care. Yeah. As Alex says, we've got to communicate with the users of these pools so that they know how to behave in the swimming pool. Now, yeah. If a big group are pulling together in the pool when the lifeguard is concerned, they can radio through and get some assistance for a duty manager to come out and have a conversation with them. But I think generally people police it themselves because they understand the risk associated and they keep away from other people.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation about this yesterday, you know, and I saw a great example of a site that's come up with a kind of a great big poster as you walk in, and like a roller banner, but also it's a piece of comms that's gone out to all of its customers, and it says, you know, we can't wait to see you and you're welcome back if. And right at the top of that is you've displayed no COVID-19 symptoms for the last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, obvious, but, you know, I've seen Bournemouth Beach, so have you. I saw Soho at the weekend. No free advertising for Wetherspoons, but what the hell. And also, you know, things are going to be different. You are going to be asked to maintain social distancing. You will be asked to leave the facility if you can't abide by those rules, because your safety and the safety of my staff and others is paramount. Sure, you understand, yours sincerely, this leisure centre. And I think that's key. You know, the more from people will expect it to be different. Of course it's going to be different. And I can't see when it's not going to be different, you know, for quite some time now. So I think it's okay to be upfront with your customers. I really do. And we need to be quite firm. So Nick Whitmore was just saying, what more, sorry, God, I haven't got my glasses on, sorry, Nick. The agreement that Nick is after, Joe, is that the essential training can take place now. So, and gone on to say, I know that local authority will want to see that.
I will, I'm just trying to think the best way I can do this. I will probably share our newsletter, and it's printed in that newsletter. The problem is at the moment is you talk to people and you get advice from the HSE and Public Health England. The quickest way to do it is phone them. If you email them, you can wait a long time to get a response. So we've got it verbally, and we know of several trusts and operators that are training from that verbal agreement. So the only thing I can do is share our newsletter where we've printed that, and you can refer the local authority back to us. Okay, I'll tell you what I'll do as well. Phil, can you just remind me to do this, mate? I'll get hold of DCMS, HSE and everybody else who I need to get hold of on the planet, and I will get it in writing and send it out. I'll just make it public. I think that's something that CIMSPA can do. Do you know what, everybody? I don't think we're going to be waiting long. I think, you know, opening is imminent. Honestly, I keep your eyes peeled on the news today. Don't get your hopes up, but something's happening today. You know, you know, these things change almost every hour, I've got to tell you. Hello, Katie's family. So, you know, as you've seen, the information that comes out of government is sporadic at best. I think, you know, with the WHO's announcement yesterday about airborne aerosols, I think that may have slowed any decisions down a little bit, but it is imminent. Okay, so I think getting ready for essential trading is absolutely permissible, and if I need to go and get that in black and white for you, that's exactly what I'll do, and I'll do it as soon as this call is finished.
Would you like me to pick that up on airborne particles and air handling? There was a brief question.
Yeah.
So obviously, what came out yesterday, and I think it's important, we actually had conversations with Professor Catherine Noakes from the University of Leeds, who is an expert in air hydraulics and looking at molecules and how they move in the atmosphere. We have prepared ourselves, and when we talk about air handling and CIMSPA guidance that you may have seen, we've prepared ourselves for airborne transmission. Now, it's important to understand that what we've currently been preparing for and what we've been looking at is airborne transmission of larger droplets when someone coughs. So it was always understood that the virus would be transmitted as an airborne, as an aerosol, when someone coughs into the atmosphere. Now, what came out yesterday was that the virus can also be transmitted in smaller molecules when someone breathes. Now, the difference between a larger molecule and a smaller molecule is that a larger one is potentially heavier and will fall from the atmosphere a lot quicker. So will potentially not be as airborne for as long. Hence, there is a difference in the risk of transmission. Now, you've got to also understand is that when someone breathes, the velocity at which a smaller molecule will come out is significantly less than when someone coughs. So in reality, it doesn't really make a huge difference to increasing the risk of transmission. We've always had airborne transmission as a likely risk, which is why we've said as much fresh air as possible on your air circulation rates. Pubs, retail, they are working at 10 litres per person per second of air change. In a pool hall, you know, a typical 25-metre pool, The pool hall volume circulating, we recommend at least 4 air changes an hour, circulates in almost 80 litres per person per second on the amount of people that we'll have within our pools typically. So we already have such great environment as it is. We have humidity as well, which at higher humidity levels, it's indicated that the virus doesn't survive as long and falls from suspension quicker. We have higher temperatures, which as well, we know COVID, that at higher temperatures, it doesn't survive as long. Someone's just put, what about gyms? As you can tell, I'm not an expert in gyms, but even all of our gyms, the Sport England guidance is at least 20 litres per person per second, pre-COVID anyway. So we should be in a positive position as it is with regards to our environment, because we've always been quite heavily focused, especially on the pools, of changing air, because we've always looked at it as a negative of the fact that our pools are chlorinated and we potentially produce chloramines into the atmosphere, and we've always wanted to remove them and recirculate the air, maintain humidity, maintain temperatures. So we've always been quite good with the amount of air changes that we undertake, and as I said, it's a minimum of 4. Those with water features are sometimes up to 8 to 10 air changes an hour. And I don't know it as much, and I'm not as much of an expert on gyms and those other areas, but they're already, if they were built in accordance with Sport England guidance, they should have already been achieving at least 20 litres per person per second. So we've got quite good already within our environments, real good clinical environments with regards to airborne transmission and limiting that, much more than an office stairwell that people will be using more so now that has no fresh air coming in and out, much more than, you know, as you're going down in areas like the tube. You know, there is so many more environments that pose a much higher level of risk internally, you know, compared to swimming pools and even gyms. So I think we're in a real strong position. We've provided that evidence base, and we've had very little come back to challenge us on that.
Rich, thanks ever so much. I'm sorely tempted to see what you're doing later and see if I can get you introduced to a man called Boris Johnson and another guy called Chris Whitty. I kind of need to hear from you. I'll see what I can do. I'm not that good, but I'll try. Listen, guys, I'm just looking at the time now. It's 4 minutes to 4. The questions have stopped. Alan, what about gyms? Not sure what your question is there. I'll come back to you. If you can just clarify that question, we can record these. This recording will be available. Phil will send it out to you afterwards. Phil's nodding, so that's looking hopeful. If there are any questions that we haven't answered, we'll review those in the round. But listen, guys, I hope you found it useful. I've learned a lot from the experts, so thank you ever so much. I've learned an awful lot this afternoon, and I certainly hope that the audience has too. So we will send some feedback out, and I said this to the guys yesterday. You know, the feedback isn't, you know, we really enjoyed it. Well, tell us you enjoyed it, that'd be great. But it's not just about that. We also want to know if you feel that we covered enough, or that it's prompted the need for another one. Just let us know. And we, you know, our job at CIMSPA is to listen and provide answers, and that's what we're going to do. We've got some great partners here. And we'll also, just a reminder, add into the recording, we'll add the STA guidance on swim schools too. So Joe, Katie, Alex, Rich, thank you ever so much for your time today. Really, really grateful. It's good to hear from you. Phil, as ever, my friend, Ledge, thank you all to the audience. Go watch the telly, and let's see what the government has to say today. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Speak soon.